Welcome to Delightfully Dysfunctional, a podcast about navigating the emotions of the human condition and the challenges that come with it. I'm Kaylani Persian Mason, a psychotherapist and life coach with James Timmons, an ever-curious human. This is not a replacement for mental health therapy. Please seek out mental health care if that's what you're needing. This is an opportunity for self-healers to dive deep and understand more about themselves. Welcome back to Delightfully Dysfunctional. I'm Kaylani, and today I am joined by Henry Winslow. He is the founder and editor of Tricycle Day, your favorite psychedelic newsletter, and I am so excited to welcome him to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Henry.
Thank you for having me, Kaylani. It's nice to be here. And if it's not your favorite psychedelic newsletter, that's okay. Maybe I can win you over today. We'll see.
Yes, it's soon to be. It certainly is mine. And it is, and that's the case for so many of my colleagues. We have so many fun conversations based off of your newsletter. So I'm really excited to bring your story and explain to people what Tricycle Day is. So let's start there. What is Tricycle Day?
Okay. Tricycle Day is a free twice-a-week email newsletter where I cover the top stories in psychedelic research, policy reform, and business. So the emerging industry around psychedelic medicine. And I think what makes it different and probably what sparks some of those conversations is the tone that I use. I really believe that humor is disarming and really important and often overlooked in communication. And it's one of the reasons that I actually created Tricycle Day in the first place. You know, I had become an avid consumer of psychedelic media as someone with a personal interest. And I found that one, it was hard to find, like there was not really one place that had everything that I was looking for. So I felt like there was a sort of curative role to play. And moreover, there was like, you know, on the one end of the spectrum, either just extremely medically dense literature, or other end of the spectrum, maybe kind of a little bit too off the deep end in terms of 5D consciousness, neo-spiritual kind of talk, which has its place, right? But it's alienating for a certain group, right? And I think that group in the middle of the bell curve was not being spoken to. And, you know, we're at this like mainstreaming inflection point for psychedelics. We have been for the past few years. And it just felt like, you know, these people are not being spoken to. Maybe I can be the person to do that.
Yeah, I think you definitely found a need and have been addressing that need. There's such wit and playfulness to the newsletter. And the more that I continue to explore psychedelics, to me, playfulness is a real theme that comes up, and how to infuse that into your life, kind of taking life too seriously. So I feel as though your newsletter really echoes that sentiment.
Yeah, it's really key for me too. I mean, I think my natural tendency is to kind of think everything is super important, especially the pressures that are on my shoulders. So it's an active practice to find the humor and playfulness and levity and things. So I'm trying to share that and kind of think of it as my medicine to give to people.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And that's the best gift, when it's something that you've discovered as a tool yourself.
Yeah. I guess I should say, you know, I think it's totally justified that, you know, psychedelics are typically treated with a level of severity and seriousness, because these are really powerful molecules, really powerful medicines, and many would say sacred, right? So I can understand how my approach might ruffle some feathers, but I think I've learned that you sort of have to ruffle some feathers if you want to make a difference in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that you are still very respectful in your delivery. So I find myself, not that there isn't, like you said, wonderful newsletters and information that's available out there, but I find myself unsubscribing from others because I can get so much from yours, and I really appreciate that. So it's often when I speak, not only sometimes to clients and their curiosity, but just friends and family about how can I learn more? How is it that you know these things? Where did you start? I think they're afraid of even like Googling it for fear that like the DEA is going to bust down their door, and they don't understand, but they have such rich curiosity. Tricycle Day is always at the top of my list if they have that curiosity.
Thank you.
And I would love to know more. I mean, I understand, but I'd love to know more because there's many of our listeners who they're still getting this introduction into psychedelics. So, where does
Right.
the name Tricycle Day come from? Where's that reference?
Yeah, it is a reference. It's a little bit of an Easter egg, and if you know, kind of thing to nod to those who catch it. I mean, there's two reasons that I named it that. One is as I was starting out to come up with this newsletter, pretty much everything else out there was psychedelic X, psychedelic Y, psychedelic Z, and from a branding ownability standpoint, I really wanted to zig when others were zagging, right? So to name it something that doesn't even mention the word psychedelics. And then that took me to the next question. Okay, how can I reference it? And so there is an anniversary that's celebrated around the first intentional dosing of LSD by the Swiss chemist Albert Hoffman, who came up with it, who discovered it in his lab. And it's called Bicycle Day, April 19th every year, because what happened was he took the dosage, which was a little bit higher than he had accidentally dosed himself with a couple days prior, and went home from his laboratory on his bicycle. And then essentially, the walls of reality start melting around him. And he was okay. He survived. I wouldn't recommend doing that, although some people do. But I thought, how can I pay homage to that? So I named it Tricycle Day, knowing that, a tricycle is a little bit easier to ride than a bicycle. And this newsletter really is all about accessibility and digestibility of the information.
Yeah, again, adding in that playfulness, and I love that. What Tell us a little bit more about your journey into psychedelics. Have you always been a psychonaut? Is this something that, just gentle exploration kept leading the way? Because now you've created a full business model around not just education, but outreach and trying to connect people around psychedelics.
No, I have not been a lifelong psychonaut. Psychedelics came into my life relatively late compared to a lot of the people that I speak to in this field. For me, it was sort of a gentle entry into it in some ways, and in other ways, it was a very violent upheaval. I say gentle because I had been exploring the nature of the self for a long time through my yoga practice and meditation practice. I was a full-time yoga teacher and had been for several years. In 2019, when I was first exposed to psychedelics, of course, I had heard about them, right? But I just didn't have very much awareness or, frankly, interest in them until a friend of mine, another yoga teacher, essentially positioned a psychedelic ceremony to me as a shortcut on the spiritual path. She said, I found the shortcut to samadhi, which in the yoga tradition is the end goal of the practice. Like that's what it is all about. And in those texts, samadhi is described as the walls separating your perception of self from the other. So the subject and object, those fall away. It's sometimes described as a non-dual state. And I was in love with that idea, but thought I would never get a chance to experience it directly. So when a friend of mine said, look, you can come and sit in ceremony, experience this medicine, and it will take you there instantaneously, I said, okay, I'm ready. Let's do this. And that was 2019, and I went straight to 5-MeO-DMT, Bufo alvarius, which, I didn't really realize this at the time, but many people consider that to be the most powerful psychedelic there is.
Right, I'm working my way up. Haven't gotten there yet, but so
Yeah, take your time.
so you took this plunge and experienced 5-MeO-DMT, and can you describe that experience a little bit?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, I've
I know
answered
words
this
are
question
hard. Words
before.
words don't describe those spaces very well.
Yeah. But in reality, language is always a symbol of the experience, right? The language always falls short. So I'll do my best. So it was a ceremonial context. I was in the Upper East Side of Manhattan in a doorman building, which was kind of funny to think about. But I stepped in, and the practitioner had really, set. He was very cognizant of set and setting. So beautiful music playing, incense. He was in ceremonial garb. And before I ingested the medicine, he had me read a prayer. And the prayer, I don't remember the exact words, but the essence of it, the effect of it was, I forgive myself of anything I've ever held against myself in the past. I forgive myself in advance for anything that I may ever hold against myself in the future. And right now, in this present moment, I accept myself. And so, I mean, I just get chills even like paraphrasing that right now. I like my hair is standing up on my arms, right? Um, and that was
Powerful
the
words.
perfect kind of mindset to enter this medicine with, because that is what I got to experience. So it served in a glass pipe. This is like the shattered particulate of a dried secretion of a desert toad, right? But it's put in a pipe and you inhale it very slowly. But you draw in like the slowest, deepest breath that you can, and then hold your breath. And I was like, okay, so what happens after you hold your breath? How long do you hold your breath? He said, don't worry. Don't worry about that. So I hold my breath, and sure enough, before I could even exhale, I'm in another dimension. It's practically instant ego death. There was a short transition period where my mind is still conjuring thoughts, and I have an internal
Mhm.
monologue. And there was a little bit of, not a little bit, there was quite a lot of panic and terror at the very beginning of that, because what's happening? I felt the center of
Right.
my heart kind of get sucked down into the center of the universe. Felt very heavy, and like I was leaving, and it felt like, okay, maybe I'm dying right now. Like this really feels like death.
No other
And that
thing I
was,
felt before, right?
I've never felt this before. It's very scary, but the one advice that he told me, he was like, don't do too much research, before you do this, because you don't want to have preconceived notions. But the one thing I will tell you is surrender to whatever happens. That's
Right.
the like guiding mantra. You just got to keep remembering that, surrender to whatever happens. So I thought of that and I said, okay, if I died, let's figure out what death is.
Hmm.
Maybe death is okay. And as soon as I had that release, the panic just completely dissolved. And on the other side of the panic was complete and total bliss. I felt like the universe hugging me in this unconditional love that I didn't even realize I had never experienced before.
Yeah.
Like true, unconditional, full embrace, the love of the universe. And I remember the last thing that my talking mind could say before even that melted away was, nothing else matters. You made
Mm.
it. This is the purpose of having a conscious experience.
Mm. That's really beautiful.
Yeah,
And
it
that
changed my life
was, I was
forever.
going to say, yeah, life changing. So that after that experience, this curiosity and desire to keep exploring really was ablaze.
Yes, it was. Although that was such a powerful experience that I was certainly in no rush to jump into another medicine
Right.
peak experience. I mean, I didn't have the terminology for it at the time around preparation and integration and all
Hmm.
these kind of, this is like the focus of the conversation now in the psychedelic scene, with good reason. Uh,
Hmm.
but intuitively, I just knew like that was, I'm going to take a minute to process that. Like on the other
Right.
side of that experience, I felt some sadness. Like, yes, it was a blissful, beautiful experience, but like in the following few days, I was really grappling like, what do I do with this knowledge? Like, I just went nearly 3 decades of my life believing that this in front of me was the extent of reality. And I just learned that that was the tippy top of the iceberg peeking over the surface. And so much more is happening. And like, how do I reorganize my life around that? Fortunately, I was a yoga teacher, right? So I did have a framework to fall back on. It gave me an intellectual framework to understand what had happened, all
Hmm.
that samadhi talk, right? Like I understood non-dual
Right. You had
states.
some natural preparation that had built in just from your life
Yes.
and the
I had
experiences
some
you've
the
chosen.
natural preparation and also the natural integration through the
Yeah.
somatic practice, right? That's so important to
Hmm.
get regrounded into earth. Um, and also, it was my work, right? So I had a kind of natural outlet to share some of these insights and process them in real time with my students. So I'm really grateful that I had that. But to your question, your original question, like, no, I wasn't jumping into,
Yeah.
mushrooms and LSD and all these
No.
other things.
Right. And I think that that's an important thing for people who don't understand psychedelics to know is that um, this isn't when you're really taking in the experience and you're doing it in an intentional way, not in a party scene, but you're doing it really for the purpose of growth and insight. Um, there's such a heaviness, but not in like a negative way. It's just like the air is thick with insights to
Yeah.
continue absorbing that there is not a desire to jump in for more. It's like, oh no, I'm rich with things that I'm processing right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It can be overwhelming.
yes, it can be overwhelming and you want to pace yourself. There's no desire for continuing to use at any kind of fast pace, which I think for
Yeah.
people who've had a script about psychedelics just kind of being under the category of like bad drugs will make you
Yeah.
addicted is a really important way to shift the perspective. It's like, oh, whoa,
Yeah.
no, I've got to just sit with that for a while. And it kind of allows you to slow down and absorb it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure there are rare cases, but I can't imagine being addicted to Bufo or 5-MeO. I mean, it is still a terrifying experience. Yes, incredibly valuable, but like, that's not something that I want to do frequently at all.
Right, right. Yes. Use with care, use sparingly. And I think that there's that natural, like you said, naturally that's what happens. And even like the fears that you're speaking to, that I feel with any psychedelic experience, it would be unusual to go into it without some fears. And that is
Yeah.
normal and natural. It's
Yeah.
also kind of just like being alive carries a lot of fear too, but you keep going and we trust the process. There's a lot of
Yeah.
parallels that we're meant to bring in.
Yeah. I think that it takes a remarkable amount of courage to engage with psychedelics seriously and with
Right.
reverence because, yeah, I mean, like, really, the reason why they are so profound is because they're shaking up the structure of your mind.
Right.
Like we take a lot of things for granted. That's part of like the efficiency of the way the brain and mind work is, you get your bearings and then you don't question them for a while. Psychedelics kind of unroot all of those things and allow you to look at things that you've kind of taken for granted for a long time in a new way and then
Yeah.
reassemble in a different way, maybe based on a new circumstance that you find yourself in.
I think it's important to be in a state of wonder and awe, and we forget that. We come to that assumption, like you said, that this tip of the iceberg that we've experienced and feel is real, or this table is concrete and everything is just as I've organized it is how it is, and the information that we're getting is how it is. And there is a lot that we don't know, and that should be exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what misconceptions, like we're kind of already like diving into this, sprinkling it in, but what misconceptions do you think people have around psychedelics that you wish they understood or that you might be trying to sprinkle into Tricycle Day?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest one that I still see is quite rampant, especially in like the pro psychedelic advocacy community, is I do not believe that psychedelics inherently improve you or make you a better person.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
there's like a lot of talk about, okay, we got to put psychedelics in the water, or if we gave psychedelics to all the authoritarian
Sure.
world leaders, like world peace would be in our fingertips. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I
Mm.
don't think that psychedelics have a moral value. I think that they have an ability to, as I said before, reconfigure your mind. But if you come in with an intention to do harm, or even a subconscious intention to do harm in a way that I think most people are motivated because they think that what they're doing is good. But,
Right.
that's a subjective ruling, right? But I think if you come in with an intention to do something that many other people would consider to be harmful, it might empower you and make you more capable of doing that.
Mm.
So
Do you feel
I
like
would
you've
challenge.
known or seen anyone where that's been the case, or you've observed that at all?
Uh, I mean, I don't want to name names,
No, no, not
but
asking that. Just,
yeah,
yeah,
but I mean, we can look at there are several examples of psychedelic facilitators, therapists who've
right.
gotten a little bit too high on their own
Yes,
supply and have abused their positions of power, taken
right,
advantage of clients in vulnerable situations. There's
right.
sexual assault cases that have been, very public. So
Hmm.
that's one example. But
Right. The dark side of the psychedelic industry.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
And the fact that it is mostly underground means that it's really hard to hold certain people accountable or have visibility into some of those things. So I think that's one of the misconceptions. Don't just assume that because someone works with psychedelics that they're, morally aligned to you.
Right.
And then the other one that's kind of a personal thing. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's fair to call it a misconception because it's just a personal belief, but I don't think that natural necessarily means better than synthetic. And I think
Yes.
that's a common refrain that you hear is like, oh, I mean, mushrooms are natural, therefore, like they're good. Like, I think mushrooms are great, to be clear.
Hmm.
But there are many natural things that are poisonous. And there are many synthetic things that are helpful that we've created because they're useful. And to go a layer deeper, I actually think that the distinction between natural and synthetic is somewhat arbitrary. Because if we really truly understand that we are a part of nature, then everything that we create is natural, just as an otter creating a
Mm.
dam is natural.
I hadn't thought that perspective and I like it. So thank you for sharing that piece. But yeah, I too initially thought natural was better. And then with personal experience have found that really is not the case and not to put that kind of grading system on any medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. What are any a lot of talk is, and as a mental health care provider, like I speak a lot to some of the mental health benefits, but I also fully believe, and I have a lot of conversations with people who are very normal functioning people, and could this
Mhm.
benefit me, or do I
Yeah.
need to be in dire straits to be considering psychedelic use? And
Yeah.
I think you've already shared in sharing your personal story, you've shared some of that, but what are your thoughts when people have that kind of commentary in their minds, or you hear it really being pushed in the marketing of these
Yeah.
medicines?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because yeah, you caught on. I mean, my personal story was not entering psychedelics through the lens of mental health. That is the prevailing narrative today, and I think with good reason. We have like a very severe crisis on
Right.
our hands, and there are many people who are considered, healthy normals, right? And I personally do believe that many people can benefit from psychedelics outside of a diagnostic therapeutic context. I mean, personally, I found them to be incredibly helpful, and the most compelling use case for me that brought me into the world was spiritual insight, personal development, understanding the true nature of the self. But there are more pragmatic uses too, creativity, focus, personal development, finding one's purpose in life, which, if ignored, can lead to mental health problems that are
Yeah.
diagnosable.
It's my
But
favorite one to help people with. Yeah, exactly.
but it
It's
doesn't
all
have to get there.
interconnected.
We don't
Yeah.
have to let it get to that point.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think that is, an area that is somewhat ignored right now. Not ignored, but it takes
Hmm.
lesser priority in the media because of for a few reasons. One is the severity of the mental health crisis, but the other is I think if we focus on mental health and solving, mental health conditions, that's what kind of establishes the data that people need to
Right.
feel comfortable and safe, and then it can extend. So I think the order of operations is correct.
Right. It makes sense. But then these conversations about the normies also getting a benefit is
Yeah.
also really valid and
Yeah.
nice to hear other stories, other voices echoing that.
Yeah.
Um, what is your hope when you think about the future of psychedelics in society? If we were to fast forward 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know you're not asking for a prediction, you're asking for a
No,
hope,
yeah,
but
yeah, hope.
it's kind of hard
It's
for me
hard.
to
It
unravel
is.
the two because I'm always like
Well,
coming
you
back to
have
what's realistic, right?
sure, and you have a lot. I mean, the newsletter takes so much consistent education that you can't help but also see a direction that is
Hmm.
forming too.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's interesting is that there are kind of like three paths right now through which psychedelics are becoming more accessible or attempting to become more accessible. First is the medical path, which we've talked to. I mean, this is the federal move through the FDA approval process, just as any other pharmaceutical medication might. And for a while, it really felt like that was the bleeding edge. That was what was leading the way. This past year was, had a lot of setbacks. Everyone expected MDMA assisted therapy from MAPS, spun off and rebranded as Lykos, to get approval. I mean, they had been recognized as a breakthrough therapy designation. And, if you had asked anybody in January of last year, is it going to happen? Everybody was like, yeah, no
Yep,
question.
yep.
And
I was in
then
that camp.
yeah, same. So was I. So was I. And then, an advisory committee came in, recommended against it. Ultimately, FDA rejected the application, said you need to do another phase 3 trial. So that set it back years and millions of dollars. There are other companies, of course, but they were the one who was furthest along in the multi-year clinical trial
Right.
program process. So meanwhile, in addition to the medicalization pathway, we have this state regulated legal market system that's unfolding before our eyes. It started with Oregon. They launched Oregon Psilocybin Services. They were the first state to legalize psychedelic therapy. I use therapy in air quotes because you can't actually market it as medical therapy.
Mhm.
And then we have Colorado just came online. They're accepting applications, doing a similar process, but having learned some lessons from Oregon, building upon it. And there are many other states considering doing similar programs with their own twists and flavors. So you have that. And then the final one is decriminalization. And this happens at the local level. So we have like federal, state, and local, each with their own kind of approach. Decriminalization really is just about letting people do this. Like you don't have to have any regulation around it. It's just taking away the criminal penalties for the possession, use, sometimes the cultivation and sharing of psychedelic substances. So to me, I mean, I think decrim is like a no-brainer. It should happen. It should happen everywhere. Why are we wasting resources on policing this when, like,
Mhm.
I think personally, it's a personal belief that people should have the autonomy and responsibility to make those choices for themselves. I'm not saying that everybody
Right.
should use psychedelics, but they should have that right. That's my belief. Then I think these legal markets are great because, some people want facilitation and facilitation is really helpful. There's a lot of studies that show that people get better outcomes when there's facilitation and support around preparation and integration. And then finally, I think medicalization is also good. This is kind of my unpopular opinion is I think all of these things can coexist. A lot of people, there's like infighting within the psychedelic community around that. Some people are really against, pharma coming in. I
Mhm.
think that, the more access points we have, the better because it will speak to different people who otherwise would never consider it. So I'd like to see all of those coexist in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And another use for psychedelics that we kind of discussed, but I'd like to dive a little bit deeper. We had discussed in a previous conversation actually was more specifically around people who are using them as entrepreneurs and infusing creativity.
Yeah.
And you have some personal experience around that. Could you speak a little bit more to the benefits that, again, someone who might not be diagnosed with anything, is not pathologized, might not have any major history of trauma, although I kind of believe we've all got our little baggage that we carry. Like, how might it benefit someone who's really trying to break down some walls in entrepreneurship?
Yeah. Well, it really comes down to the same sort of theory around the mechanism of action, right? Like if I know there are a lot of different psychedelics and I'm grouping them for simplicity's sake into just one category, but if we take as truth that psychedelics work by shaking up the snow globe, if you will, getting us out of entrenched thought patterns that are keeping us very contained in how we think and how we talk to ourselves and the sort of ideas that we even consider. That's like one characterization of depression or anxiety is like ruminative thoughts
Right.
about the past or the future, right? And if psychedelics take us out of that to create new thought patterns, it becomes very easy to understand how that could work outside of, a clinical context. If you're thinking about your business the same way every day, day in, day out, that's going to keep you in a very kind of myopic view of what's possible. But if you shake up the snow globe and reconsider some of those thought patterns, get you out of the grooves, get you out of the entrenched thoughts, you start to see, wow, there's possibility left, right, and center that I never even thought to consider. And so that's like from a conceptual standpoint, how I believe it helps. But as you said, yeah, I have personal experience with this. And I think just like with therapy, when facilitation can play a really important role, the same is true here. So, my experience is going into a mastermind setting where you have, 10 to 12, maybe 15 entrepreneurs in a room, and each person takes a turn in a hot seat where they go up and they talk about, their key challenge in their business right now as they see it. They give all the context that's necessary for a third party with otherwise no context to be able to weigh in. And then you hear from each person, reflections, suggestions, maybe advice, maybe, similar experiences that they've been through and how they got around it or through it. And it's all enhanced. The whole interaction is enhanced because everyone has dosed on a certain psychedelic that allows you to open your mind, turn off your fear through your amygdala, and just be open to receiving and open to giving, even among strangers.
Yeah, I think that's great because being an entrepreneur kind of means being in some state of fear. Oftentimes, you're like trailblazing, you're trying to think of something someone else isn't doing and break out of the mold in some way or putting yourself out there. So I can see that having a lot of really lovely benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And kind of switching gears again to talk about your business, to talk about Tricycle Day. What are the most exciting aspects of Tricycle Day for you? What do you enjoy the most out of what you've created?
Well, I chose this business because I really believe in like creative expression, and I see this as an art form. Every newsletter, I feel accomplished and proud of what I put out there, and it feels like something that can't be systematized. And I know a big part of business is like having standards of procedure and like figuring out how you can create more efficiency and turn it into a machine, right? But I love that there is one aspect of it that you can't really do that to, and that's the creative piece. And so that is really heart fulfilling and purpose fulfilling for me. I love that part of the business is actually creating the content. Whether it's the newsletter or the memes, whatever, all of that is really, fulfilling for me.
Yes, follow him on Instagram. And what other socials can people find Tricycle Day?
I'm personally active on LinkedIn too, so I share snippets of the newsletter there. But yeah, the main platforms would be the newsletter itself, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Yes, I love sharing them. They're so fun and witty. So thank you. Keep them coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, the content creation is a really important and fun part for me. But then, like, the other thing is just kind of like watching how the audience, like the customers, the universe, if you will, however you want to look at it, how it pulls like the next step out of me, as long as I remain true to like, what is the purpose of this? Why am I doing this? And that allows me to like get answers on where to go next. Like if you were to ask me at the very beginning where this would be in 3 years, I would not have been able to predict a lot of the things that are happening right now.
Right. So it's about staying present and really applying, it sounds like, some of your skills in yoga and meditation to the unfolding of this and being creative and infusing a lot of the things you've learned from the help of psychedelics and being courageous and brave too.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, it's hard for me to disentangle what aspects of my operating system in the world come from yoga and which don't, because it's been such a part of my life for a long time.
Woven in.
but there's no question that, yeah, my practice has supported me.
Hmm. And you've interviewed also such amazing figures in the psychedelic world. Who are some that were the most fun or surprising, exciting for you?
Yeah, yeah. The interviews are really fun. That's another fun part of Tricycle Day that I didn't mention, because having a platform creates like this opportunity, this surface area for you to meet your idols, which is a really cool thing. Like I never would have thought I would have been able to compel Rick Doblin to speak to me before, but he was on my bucket list and I've interviewed him. I interviewed Robin Carhart Harris, who's a preeminent psychedelic researcher. That was really cool. And then two others that are just coming to mind right now are Sunny Strasberg. She's
Hmm.
a psychedelic therapist who really connected me to the modality of internal family systems, IFS,
Yeah.
which I didn't know a ton about before, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
interviewed her about that. And, I'm not certified in IFS or anything, but I get
Hmm.
it now. And
It's
I've
very
read
complementary to psychedelics.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I read Dick Schwartz's book, and I've been using that sort of in
Yes.
my practice and just my processing, and it's
Very few
really helpful.
people would understand how exciting this was, but at the last MAPS conference, I sat right behind Dick Schwartz and Sunny and Bessel van der Kolk, and I was like fangirling so
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're awesome. And then I guess one other person I would like to mention is Azalea Montano Kemp, who is someone who was just engaging with my memes on Instagram. We struck up a conversation, and I learned that she's like in her 20s. She's mestizo and she was bringing indigenous wisdom from like the Mazatec lineage to like the US like Gen Z audience and also others, but like just really being a bridge. And I thought that was so cool. So I ended up interviewing her, and she actually ended up coming in and working with me on Tricycle Day. So she was like the first person I ever brought into the team.
Oh, that's so exciting. And the avenue that it flowed through, those synchronicities.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all about that. And I'm so excited about the path and the direction that continues to unfold for you and for Tricycle Day. I think it says a lot about following your passion and staying true to yourself and just kind of navigating one step at a time, which can be so hard, but is so rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta stay present and also hold the high vision for the future. And that's the challenge, is like balancing that tension without getting caught up too myopically in either one.
Yeah. If you could leave one core message about psychedelics or your work, what would it be?
Hmm. I'm gonna skip the invitation to make it about my work and instead focus it on what I've learned from psychedelics, because this is the most important thing I've ever taken away from any
Mm.
psychedelic experience, and it was from that very first one. The threats to your physical body are real. The threats to your emotions, your mental state, that's all real. There are very real risks out there in the world, and it's normal to be cautious and even afraid of them. But underneath all of that, I know deep within my heart that my spirit is safe and nothing can touch it. And that gives me so much calm and focus when things get frenetic, to come back to that, to remember that. And I hope that everybody can experience something that teaches them that that is true, so they can believe it.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of inner peace can sprout. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for joining us today, Henry. This was such a fun conversation for me. And is there anything coming up on with Tricycle Day, any events or things that you would like people to know, or do you just want them to sign up?
The number one thing is, if you are interested in following this space, please sign up to the newsletter. It's free. It always will be. So that's available to you. If there are psychedelic facilitators listening to this podcast, then I would also encourage them to check out our private community that we launched this year. It's called Practice Expansion. And what's special about this community is one, you get to connect with other facilitators, which is kind of challenging in this world, given the kind of underground and gray nature of it all. It's
Mhm.
still sort of clandestine. That's one. And the other thing is we don't teach you how to sit with clients. It's assumed that you know how to do that work. But our focus in this community is helping you learn to scale your practice, um, attract more clients, and sustain, a livable income. So if that's of interest, check that out. It's called Practice Expansion. The URL for it is community.tricycleday.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll make sure to include all those links for our listeners. Thank you, Delightful Humans, for joining us for this episode with Henry Winslow from Tricycle Day. And we will see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Thank you, delightful humans.